Hello, everybody. Welcome to another round of our roundtable conversation. Today, we're going to have the great and interesting, fascinating, and very touchy topic of abortion, pro-choice versus pro-life. We have Sheri representing the one point of view and Dr. Christina presenting the other point of view. I think it's going to be very interesting. I'm going to remind everybody the rules of our roundtable and our mission. Our mission is to spread the spirit and technique of creating a common pool of meaning and conversation, especially when discussing divisive topics like abortion. The rules are as follows. 1, all participants in the roundtable are equal. This one's equal to this one because they are wonderful. Dr. Christina and Dr. Sheri are both wonderful, and it doesn't matter the background or whatever it is. The minute you are engaged in a roundtable conversation, everybody have the same value and their opinions matter as much. The second rule is one person speaks at a time. So we're going to have turns. Dr. Christina will talk, Dr. Sheri will talk, and vice versa. And the other person will, brings us to our third rule, listen. If you're not talking, you're busy actively listening. This is very important. I think this is really the crux of the roundtable, to actually be engaged in trying to understand where the other person is coming from, to understand their point of view. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with someone if you're listening to them. It just means that you're listening to them and you're respecting their point of view as a human being, and you're getting your point of view more developed and evolved, and you might learn something new, you might change your mind, but you might not, but you are listening. So that's our third rule. The fourth rule is we always add to the common pool of knowledge, never negate, never argue. I think this is an important rule also that creates a lot of the good spirit that we cultivate here. This basically means not that you have to agree about everything, but it means that if I disagree with something, if Dr. Christina says that the sky is pink, and I believe in my heart and hearts that the sky is actually green. So rather than saying, I think that Dr. Christina is wrong, she doesn't know what she's talking about, she is deplorable, I just say, I think that the sky is green. I don't address the fact that I disagree with her. I don't address the fact of whether she's right or not. I just say my own point of view. My point of view is that the sky is green. And that way we create a shared common pool of meaning. And when we talk, we speak to the topic according to the question that was asked. We take into consideration people's attention span. There will be a timer. It will ring. You will hear it ring when your time is up. Just wrap up what you're saying if you heard it ring already, and let the next speaker say his piece. And without any further ado, we shall start with the first question. And Dr. Christina, please, could you start off with telling us a little bit about yourself and how you've gotten involved in the abortion question and why this is an important question for you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in the question of abortion, and why this is important for you. Dr. Christina, take it away.
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. My name, like you said, is Dr. Christina Francis. I'm a board-certified obstetrician and gynecologist, and I practice in the state of Indiana. And I also am chair of the board of the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists. It's a mouthful to say, but we are a professional membership organization that consists of women's healthcare providers who desire to practice medicine from a pro-life standpoint, from a standpoint that respects life from conception to natural death. So I'm chair of the board of APLOG, and we do a lot of work just in education, both within the medical community and within the public, of what abortion is, its effects on women, and so forth. How I got involved with the abortion question, I, all growing up, grew up in a pro-life family, and so kind of came from that background, but never, for a long time, didn't really know exactly why I was pro-life. And so actually about 5 or 6 years ago, had a very close friend who challenged me to think a little bit deeper about this question and kind of firm up why I believe the things that I believe about abortion. And so that challenged me just to take a deeper look and realized that abortion, you know, I think regardless of your position on abortion, you can agree that this is a major issue in our culture and something that is felt very deeply and very important. And so I just was very challenged to look into it more. And when I did, realize that those of us who oppose abortion have a good basis based on science, based on logic, and just based on, I think, basic morality, which all of those things I think we'll get into at some point during this conversation. So that's how I got involved. At the time, I was serving at a mission hospital overseas in Kenya and decided to come back to the U.S. to not only practice medicine, but also to work in this field. So,
thank you very much. Dr. Sheri.
Well, first of all, I'm not a doctor.
Not a doctor. Sorry.
Okay. What I actually am is I'm a certified nurse-midwife gynecology practitioner, registered nurse. I'm a childbirth educator and have transitioned into being what I call holistic sexuality educator. So I have worked in the field of women's health for getting on 40 years. And worked as an educator in some way or another for all of that time. The years that I was actively working as a midwife and a women's healthcare provider, I also did, while I did not perform abortions, I did counsel women about their options. And I've been active in the pro-choice movement for most of my life. I come at that from the perspective of loving life and loving women and babies and wanting healthy mommies and healthy babies. And I would love a healthy culture where we actually don't really need to have abortion very often, where we had great sexual health education and we helped people access healthcare and contraception, and we worked on all of the social justice issues that lead to unwanted pregnancies. And I would still always want abortion to be an option for women if that's what they feel like they need to do. So that's where I come from.
Thank you very much. It's really exciting to have you both on board. And without any further ado, let us delve into the heart of the issue. So the first thing I want to address, and I think this is really like at the crux of a lot of the debate about abortion, is the issue of the beginning of life. When do you think that human life begins? Do you think that it begins at conception? Does it begin when the fetus becomes viable? Does it begin at birth? Maybe somewhere else? Dr. Christina, take it away.
Okay. Well, I mean, the good news about the answer to this question is that my opinion and what I think doesn't actually play into the answer to the question. So I can give you an answer based on science, the science of embryology, that tells us very clearly that at the moment of conception, a new human being comes into existence, a new living human being comes into existence. One of the embryology textbooks that I used in medical school was written by an embryologist named Ward Kisher. And one of the quotes from his book was that it is undisputed scientific fact that every embryologist in the world knows that a distinct living human being comes into existence at the moment of conception. At that moment, sperm ceases to exist, the egg ceases to exist, and you suddenly have this new distinct organism that is a living organism, meets all the criteria of a living organism. And because it comes from one human being and another human being, therefore, according to the laws of science, can't be anything other than a human being. So again, my opinion in this matter, I mean, I agree with the science of that, obviously, but my opinion doesn't play into it. It's based on our scientific knowledge.
Registered nurse Sheri.
If anything, midwife. So from my perspective, when a sperm and an egg join, a sperm and a egg become a fertilized cell that has the potential to be a person. And at some point, if that process continues, will be a person. But I think there's a long way between a single cell or a ball of cells and a baby. And so for me, I think the question is not so much when does the potential for a life begin, because I do agree that that begins at the moment of conception. And I also think that it's somewhere along the pathway that it becomes closer to a actual potential person. So for me, that's the issue, is where that happens and when decision making can occur that might end a pregnancy if that's the choice of the woman with the advice of her healthcare providers. So to me, the idea that first trimester abortions are, to me, that one is clear cut. It gets trickier for me in the second trimester, and any kind of late term procedure, again, from my perspective, would only be if you were going to have a child that was unable to sustain life or was putting the mother's health at risk. So for me, first trimester abortion, it's a potential life, but not life yet. Second trimester, I think we really need to look carefully, especially as we get further into it, about what's going on and what the choices are. So those are the divisions that work for me.
Thank you very much to both of you. And this brings me to the second question, which I hope will add a little bit of nuance to it. Do you believe that there is a certain point from which on human life exists, and that's it, like an on-off switch, there is no life, whoops, there is life? Or do you think that human life starts gradually, like it starts like a little flicker and then gradually it gets brighter and brighter till you actually have a human baby, a human life? Like, is it more of a dimmer switch, or is it more of an on-off switch of life? Do you actually see a difference from born baby or 8-month-year-old fetus to 1-week-old embryo? Dr. Christina.
Well, so I think that that's a great question, and I'm going to refer back a little bit to Sheri, what you just said, because I think that your follow-up question kind of plays into that. So, I think one thing when we're having this discussion about when life begins, you oftentimes hear a lot of different terms thrown around, and human being would be one, which is a scientifically definable entity. We know that something that belongs to the human species meets certain scientific criteria. And person is really not a scientific term. It's more of a philosophical term. So people will talk about person as far as a person has rights X, Y, and Z. A non-person does not have those rights. So it's really not a scientifically definable term. It's more of a philosophical term. And, certainly we could talk about that, about, what qualifies as a person, what doesn't. When we're talking about human beings, though, again, because it's scientifically definable, we can know when it begins. And again, science very clearly says there's no debate about this within the honest scientific community about when a human being comes into existence, and that is at the moment of conception. At that moment of conception, that human being, even though it's a single-celled zygote, that single-celled zygote has all of the genetic information that he or she will need to become the born human being, the toddler, the child, the adolescent, the adult that he or she will one day be. And so at that moment of conception, a process of development is initiated. And I'd like to note that that development doesn't stop when we're born. That development continues throughout the rest of our lives. So if we're looking at a point in time where, okay, we can say this definitively is a human being, a distinct human being, because that human being that has come into existence at the moment of conception is completely genetically unique from either one of his or her parents. So that is a distinct being that exists within that mother's womb that's completely genetically distinct from the mother, obviously, because, if you have a male fetus, that mother doesn't magically become male while she's carrying that fetus, right? Because she's got a genetically distinct human being growing inside of her. And so while the process of development is kind of like turning on a switch very slowly, where you gradually go through that process of development, that development doesn't magically end when we're born either, or when we reach the point of viability. That development continues throughout our entire life. So just because something is less developed than we are, doesn't make that entity less human than we are, because that human being comes into existence at the moment of conception.
Thank you very much. Midwife Sheri, 3 times the charm.
Well, I definitely don't want to get entangled in terminology. so I certainly agree that there is this process of development, and that moment of conception is a significant, the spark of that. So that I'm with you on. I would say that I do make a distinction between, and maybe using the word person is better, but an individual that can sustain life on their own, to me, is very different from the developing fetus that's inside the uterus that requires another person's body to be sustained. So to me, there is, while development goes on for our lives, there's definitely the distinction between someone who's born and someone who's not, and somebody who can survive breathing on their own and so forth. So to me, that distinction that says, and I hear what you're saying, that it, from your perspective, it certainly is, from a species point of view, a human, genetically human, from the moment it's conceived. I still don't feel like it's a person yet. I just feel like it's a potential person. And so for me, that's where that distinction comes in. So it's very much a process that I see of developing, and what I would really call incarnating, of not to go off onto a spiritual sidetrack, but of something that starts to become what will be a baby. And again, I totally hear what you're saying. And I respect it. I really do. I understand that perspective. For me, though, my perspective is that there is this process, and that whether a woman chooses to continue that process or not, for me, so much has to be her choice, because that process goes on in her body, and that baby that is born is going to impact her life and her health. And of course, if a woman chooses not to go down that path, that will have impacts as well. So that's where I come out.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah, we can do a second round about the same question.
Okay.
You want to ask a question, or do you want to just do another round on the same question?
Well, a little bit of both, I guess, but one, I just wanted to ask Sheri a question, just so that from here forward, then we're talking about this. I just make sure that we're talking about the same thing. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fair. I'll just summarize and tell me if that covers it. I think it's a fair point, and let's agree that even if I blurt out human life, we will be talking about personhood, because I'm more interested in the morality aspect of this debate than about the scientific one. Obviously, at conception, it's an embryo. He has a genetic package of one sort of another. But I think the core of the question here and the core of the debate is also, is this a person? Should we treat it as a person? Is abortion, effectively the question is abortion murder or not? Is it a human being?
Sure.
Is that fair? Does that answer your question, or you still want to go over it?
Well, I guess my question would just be, if we're going to talk about personhood as the center of this debate, which really is, in conversations that we have, is this a person or isn't it? Because obviously that changes what people would think about this issue. I guess my question would be, the main question that I would have is for Sheri, or for anybody who's out there listening to be thinking about, is what is it then that you believe qualifies a human being as a person? Because so far, from discussions that I've had with other people and reading and things like that, there does not seem to be a consensus about what qualifies a human being as a person. And I think it's a really important point to bring up and to discuss, one, because I want to make sure that we're on the same page, or that I'm understanding exactly what you're saying as we're having this discussion. But also, I think as we look back through history, we can see several instances in where even born human beings were qualified as non-persons for one reason or another, and that allowed the significant mistreatment of them by society in general, by our country, certainly, I'm sure all of us can think of instances like that in history. So I think it's just an important thing to try to define, just so that, one, we know that we're all kind of discussing the same thing, and two, because I just think it's a good thing for everybody to think about, what do I think qualifies a human being as a person?
Fair enough. And let me summarize, if that's okay. First of all, we're going to touch about other things as well, other aspects of the debate as well. But yeah, that's a fair question. And definitely, like throughout history, it's interesting to know that even in ancient Greece, for instance, born babies were not considered persons and were actually considered property of their fathers, held at some households until they reached maturity. Their father could kill them at will if he deemed right. So I'm happy we have a consensus. Once a baby is born, then it is a person, and we frown upon killing them. So that's a point of consensus in general society. But between conception and that, there seems to be a bit of a avid debate these days, and that's really the core of the debate. And the question, I'll put it to you first, Dr. Christina, I think that's fair, is okay. What do you think defines a person? 2 minutes.
Sure. Well, so, again, I don't think that there is a settled definition of what defines a person, but since you asked for my opinion, I'll give that to you. So in my mind, because we don't have any point along the developmental spectrum where we can definitively say, okay, now this human being is a person, but before this human being wasn't, then personhood, which confers, in my mind, a moral standing within our society, meaning I have rights and I deserve respect because I'm a person. I think all of us would agree, and I'm just choosing this because it's an easy example. I'm not anti-animal rights whatsoever. I'm all for treating animals kindly and not for abusing animals. But I think, most people in general discussion would agree that human beings, human persons have some sort of standing in society that is higher than that of animals. And that's because of our human nature and the fact that we are persons. And so that confers some moral worth and, again, rights that are discussed in our Constitution, just general human rights, that I have the right not to go out on the street and be assaulted. Why is that? Well, because I'm a person and, a living person. So because there's no consensus whatsoever on when that personhood begins, and we could certainly discuss some of the theories that are out there about when personhood begins and maybe their validity or their points of worth and where they're not, where they don't quite hold up. But because we don't have a consensus on that, then in my mind, we would have to say at the moment that our human nature comes into existence, at that moment, we have the rights of every other human being. And the only moment that we can pinpoint for that is the moment of conception, because that's when that new, distinct, living and whole human being comes into existence.
Well, from my perspective, viability is really an issue here when we're talking about intrauterine development, again, that has to happen inside the body of another person who we know for sure is a person with rights. So for me, viability is really one of the significant definers of personhood. So certainly once a baby is born or is at the point where it could be born and be independent, to me that's a signifier, without getting into the whole thing about animals and intelligence and sentience and consciousness, because those are all issues. But I think right here, the one I would focus on is viability.
Thank you very much. Can we move to the next question? It all really surrounds around personhood, really. It's like that is effectively the essence of the question. And that kind of brings me to the next question regarding, from the abortion perspective, is, do you believe that abortion is okay throughout the pregnancy, or really you've already answered that, your perspective? Sheri, you think it's okay till viability, or do you think that it is never okay? Is the day after pill okay, or is the day after pill already like going against the rights of this person, which is a one-day-old embryo? From what point onward is, to your mind, abortion unacceptable?
Did you want me to start?
No, Dr. Christina, we'll just keep on the same.
Okay.
Unless. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Well, in my perspective, abortion at any point in pregnancy is not ever okay. I want to give a definition, though, of what I'm referring to when I say abortion, because I do think that that's important. So an abortion, the abortion procedure or medication abortion, the only intention of that abortion is to end the developing human life, whether you think that's a person or whether you want to refer to it as a pregnancy or, something like that. So when I'm talking about abortion, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about either medication or a procedure that's intention is to end that developing human life. So that is very different from, say, the very rare circumstance in which a mother's life is in danger. She might die because of the pregnancy, and we have to prematurely separate the mother and that developing human life. That's very different. Your intention there is to save the life of the mother. So, and that certainly is needed. I have participated in that in the past. It's a very, I'm sure Sheri would agree, because she's probably taking care of some mothers in that situation, and it's heart-wrenching for everyone who's involved. So, and Sheri, I know we're probably not supposed to go back, but I just wanted to say, when you said that you love women and you love babies and you love healthy women and babies, I thought, yes, I'm having a discussion with someone who sees things from my point of view, as far as, that's what we're both in the fields that we chose for, because we do love women and we love their babies and we want to maximize their health. So, I know that Sheri knows what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, these situations which are heartbreaking for everyone involved, where the mom's life truly is in danger. So of course, that from a medical perspective, there are times when that is very necessary. However, when we're talking about situations where the mother's life is not in danger, then I do not believe that abortion is okay at any point in pregnancy. And I'll give you my 3 simple sentences why. My 3 simple sentences for why I oppose abortion at any point in the pregnancy is because abortion intentionally ends the life of an innocent human being. I believe that it is wrong to intentionally end the life of an innocent human being, and so therefore abortion must be wrong according to that view. So I think when you look at it from that, and that's really why the central question in the abortion debate really is, what is that unborn child or that unborn human being? The fetus, which is just a developmental term, just like child, adolescent, teenager, adult. Fetus is just a point in our human development. I think that really is the central question of this entire debate is having that discussion of what is that unborn child, because if it is a human being, especially if it is a person with rights, then none of us have the right to take that innocent life.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, from my perspective, as already noted, I think that is a potential person. So for me, a first trimester abortion is absolutely okay. It's a woman's choice to have a child, not have a child, go through a pregnancy with the attendant risks of pregnancy and childbirth, which in our first world country are not so significant, but are highly significant risks in many, many parts of the world. I think early second trimester still falls into that category for me. Once we're getting farther along in the pregnancy than that, we're getting to the point of viability. At that point, I think in the rare circumstances when the mother's life is at risk, and I also actually had a patient who was diagnosed very late with the child had a condition that was not compatible with life, is the way that we say it, and she chose to end that pregnancy rather than carry it another few months and give birth to a child that wasn't alive. So in those rare circumstances, I think abortion sort of from the middle of the second trimester through the third trimester would only be those rare circumstances. But again, because I don't have the same perspective about when life begins, and because I'm also really looking at it from the bigger picture, that it's not just about the fetus, it's about the mom, it's about her circumstances, her choices, and all of the ramifications that having a baby has for people. So to me, those are big issues. And we're talking about health, we're talking about social issues, we're talking about social justice, and so forth. So there are all these other things that I think need to be weighed against what I consider to be a potential life.
Thank you very much. And let's start addressing some of these issues, some of these wider issues. So parenthood is clearly, as a parent, a very major financial burden. There seems to be a correlation between women who are being denied abortion and then becoming unemployed, going on public welfare, falling below the poverty line, and becoming victims of domestic abuse. 42% of women having abortions are below the federal poverty level. Is it right to prevent women who do not have the resources or will to raise children from aborting? Dr. Christina, please.
Sure. Well, I have a few things to address under that topic. One is I think it's important to note that if we ban abortions or if women choose not to have abortions, it doesn't mean they're being forced to parent, right? They don't have to parent those children if they feel like for whatever reason they can't. So we have adoption that's available. There are waiting lists of people, especially for newborns, that are desperate to have children who would very gladly adopt these children. And we see this all the time with there are lots of people out there who adopt and are happy to adopt. So I'm certainly not defending or promoting forcing people to parent their children, because I know that there are very definite circumstances where they either can't, or they just feel like, they're not going to be able to maybe continue on to school if they're parenting this child. So certainly the option of placing a child for adoption is always out there. And I think that one of the things that we need to do better as a society is kind of lifting the taboo off of adoption, because it really can be a wonderful thing for children, for families. And but I think a lot of people still have a lot of misunderstanding about the process of adoption, or maybe hesitancy to do it because they don't really understand it. So that's certainly something I think as a society we can do better. And then also offering women support. So many women that I've had in my office who maybe were considering abortion, the big reason oftentimes is that they just simply don't feel like they have the resources that they need to raise a child. And there are a lot of resources out there. And a lot of women that I've talked to, once they realize the resources they can utilize, are willing to parent their children. Not saying that that's an easy decision, because it certainly isn't. And I know a lot of women find themselves in a very difficult situation when it comes to a pregnancy. I don't agree, though, that denying abortion to women hurts women who are in impoverished situation, or it causes poverty, for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, we know that actually a lot of abortion facilities are located in impoverished neighborhoods, and so more than non-impoverished neighborhoods. So, this is something that is women already have significant access to. But this is where we have to come back to the core of this discussion, which is, what is that unborn being? Is it a human being or a person? Would we say that a mother, and this is going to sound a little bit out there, but I just think it's a good kind of thought experiment, but would we say that a mother who is impoverished would have the right to kill her born children? It would accomplish the same thing if we're just looking at simply reducing the number of children that she has to care for and financially provide for. I'm sure Sheri's with me on this one. I'm sure you're with me. I'm sure everyone who's listening is with me on this one, that would not be okay. And I'm just gonna make my last sentence that my point would be that unborn child is a moral equivalent to a born child.
Okay, so I think we've got to look at issues of social justice, equality, and choices around healthcare and access, all of those things. I do agree that adoption is an option for people. If people want to go down that pathway, women still have to go through the pregnancy and go through the birth and then give up a child. And I've seen women do that, and it can be not that difficult, or it can be incredibly traumatic for them. So adoption is certainly one option. I don't think it's an option that a lot of people are choosing for a variety of reasons. I'd certainly love to make it easier for people to make that choice if they want to make that choice. However, I think we also have to look at what's going on. Well, I'll just speak to this country because it's an issue around the world, but in the last less than 10 years, there have been enormous numbers of abortion restrictions passed. And the states that have the harshest abortion restrictions have significantly declined in all of the benchmarks of maternal and child health. So we're seeing more infant mortality, more maternal mortality, low birth weight babies, preterm births, all of the things that we don't want to see. And I think that's really important. There are a lot of places where women do not have easy access to abortions or even adequate counseling about what their options are. I love that you give people access to resources. It's one of the things that I'm always really a champion of, making sure people have access to all the resources that are available. But this country is pitiful, especially when you look at the rest of the world. We don't support women prenatally. We don't support them well during the birth. We don't do good postpartum. And then we don't do so well afterwards. You know, almost every other country, women will get a salary, will get paid for a year, 2, 3 years to stay home with their children. So I don't think that we can separate the abortion access issues from all of the ways that we are terrible at supporting the lives that we have already. And so I think that's a big part of it. And then I mentioned this earlier, but we have terrible education about sexuality and reproductive health, and not very good access to help people know what their options are around contraception. And the countries that do better at all of those things have significantly lower rates of abortion because they have lower rates of unwanted pregnancies. And so to me, that's where we need to put our energy, which is, again, making abortion something that not so many women feel compelled to choose, although I still want it to be a choice for those who want it.
Thank you very much.
Can I get a second round on that one, or?
Sure. But I'm going to make it a bit shorter. We're going to do 2 minutes each, okay?
Okay. So Sheri, I am in complete agreement with you that in this country, in what I think is one of the greatest countries in the world, I'm proud to be an American, I'm proud to live here. And, you know, I think we have great access to healthcare in general, but I agree. I think we're doing a bad job of supporting women during their pregnancies, during the postpartum period. We need to make huge strides on that for sure. And, you know, it really, for a first world country to have the maternal mortality rates that we have is significant. It's really significant, and we need to be doing everything that we can do to decrease that maternal mortality rate, our preterm birth rate. But I would say that abortion is not the answer for that, ending women's pregnancies is not the answer to then not having to give them support during their pregnancy and postpartum. Also, we know, based on more than 150 studies now, that surgical abortions significantly increase a woman's future risk of preterm births in future pregnancies. And these are preterm births that occur less than 32 weeks, which then lead to significant neonatal morbidity and mortality. And again, this is proven by more than 150 studies now, that prior abortions are an immutable risk factor for preterm birth, more of a risk factor even than smoking for preterm birth and future pregnancies. There was also a recent study that just came out of Finland within the last couple of years, which has a great medical record keeping system because of their centralized medicine, where they looked at about 10,000 deaths in women of reproductive age, and actually showed that women within a year after an abortion had a 4 times higher risk of death than after a full-term birth. And so these are good numbers that are coming out of countries that have good record-keeping systems. Unlike the U.S., unfortunately, this is another area where I feel like the U.S. could do a better job. We need to do a better job keeping records of health data in general. So I don't think that abortion is the answer to these social justice issues, but Sheri, you and I are in complete agreement that we need to be working on improving healthcare for moms and babies in this country.
And I'll just quickly throw out that one of the things that happens with scientific studies, especially when there's a lot of them, is that you can often find studies that have conflicting data. And so there are many studies that indicate that abortion has absolutely no relationship to any kind of significant health issues. So there are studies out there that can argue that point as well. And we do know for sure that there are women who are going to die because they've had unsafe, illegal abortions. We know that for sure. And then, of course, there are maternal deaths. So I would argue, in fact, that having abortions, statistically speaking, and can pull in all kinds of scientific data if we want, but I'm not going to go into it too much, but I think we could argue either side of that point and find scientific data to support us. But I'm pretty firmly in the camp that abortion is a safer option, a legal, healthy abortion, a safer option than continuing a pregnancy, particularly for very young women, possibly for women who are in poverty. So again, it's there's a lot of great science out there, and it's hard sometimes to really look at all the studies and come up with a definitive answer, because there's so many and they have such different answers on this question.
So Dr. Christina kind of brought up our next question, and you kind of touched up on it, so I'll just make it super short if any one of you want to add anything to it. But basically the question was, do you think that abortion has negative health effects on women? And I'm just going to do like 1 minute for the both of you, because I feel like we mostly touched upon it.
Sure. It absolutely has negative effects on women. And this is one thing that at AppLog, our goal is to educate the public. We certainly, I am all for empowering women. And I think part of empowering women is to arm them with the information that they need to make an informed choice. So again, over 150 studies. This is not just a single study that shows an increased risk of preterm birth. It's more than 150 studies. This has been published in very well-respected medical journals, that it increases the risk of preterm birth and future pregnancies. We know that there is an increased risk of mental health problems, not necessarily right in the short term, but when you follow women out for 10, 20 years beyond their abortion, there's about an 81% increased risk of some sort of mental health issue. There's a 6 times increased risk of suicide in women who have had abortion versus women who have chosen, even in unintended pregnancies, to carry those to term. So yes, those are just very briefly some of the negative health effects that we know that abortion has for women.
Well, I guess I will just add that, pregnancy itself has risks, birth has risks, and there are postpartum risks, things like depression, and all of the challenges that come from raising children when you don't want them or didn't feel prepared or not in an economic situation to support them. So I think if we wanted to pull out studies and argue those points, we probably could find studies that support either perspective. Just let it go at that.
I swear to God, I think Dr. Christina is sneaking a peek at my questions. If I wouldn't know any better, I'd say. Anyway, do you think that women's mental health is better served by the availability or by the denial of abortion?
Well, I certainly think that women oftentimes in the immediate time frame feel a sense of relief after they have had an abortion. They are facing an unexpected pregnancy that they couldn't imagine, how on earth they were going to continue that pregnancy and raise that child. And so, I think if we look at their immediate mental health, I'm sure that a lot of women feel immediate relief. And that relief may last for a long time. It may last. I'm not trying to say that 100% of women have negative mental health outcomes from their abortions or regret it. I will say that in my experience with patients that I've seen in my office who I just they just came in. I'm not directing them in any way, just kind of opened up for them to share. Maybe they came in to see me for a follow-up after their abortion or something like that. I've sat with many of them as they cried and regretted their decision. Because I think for any sort of big life choice, which I think Sheri and I would probably both agree on this, that when a woman chooses an abortion, it's a major event in her life. It's a major choice. I don't think that there are very many women out there at all who have chosen abortion who made that decision lightly. Maybe there's somebody out there who has, but I think for most women, this is a major life decision for them. And so I think anytime we're going to make a major life decision, we need to invest time into thinking about that. And the unfortunate thing is that so many women, I think, feel so rushed to make this decision because they are facing this crisis pregnancy that they don't know what to do with, and they just want to get it over. And so, oftentimes the decision is made kind of in the heat of the moment. And at least in my life, I don't know about you, Sheri, but at least in my life, when I've made big decisions in the heat of the moment, I'd say at least 50% of the time I look back and think, oh man, if I had taken some time to really think that through, I probably would have made a different decision. So, and I don't think this decision is any different. And so if we're looking at immediate mental health, again, I'm sure the vast majority of women who have chosen abortion will say, oh, I just felt this relief. It was over. I could move on with my life. But then you get out 10 years down the road and this woman has depression that she doesn't know where it's coming from. And you talk to her and you find out that it's tied back to this abortion that she now regrets. And so I think, as healthcare providers, we need to not only think about our patients' immediate health, whether it be their mental health or their physical health, we also have to think about their long-term health. And I would say, based on my conversations with patients who have abortions in their past, especially maybe their distant past, as well as, again, the studies that have been done that have talked to women when they're farther out show that it definitely has a negative mental health effect. However, to offset that, we definitely need to be providing good mental health to women who have chosen to continue their pregnancies, but still find themselves in a very stressful situation or feel like they don't have good support. I believe that my job as a pro-life physician, as a physician who, supports the life of both mother and baby, which I know Sheri does too. My job is not simply to talk her out of that abortion and then say, okay, I'll see you later. I'll see you when you deliver and then no more. I mean, certainly we need to be providing these women with support throughout their pregnancy, after their delivery, as they're raising their children. And this is something that I think we, in general, as a society, can do better at.
Well, I'll say from my clinical and teaching experience, I've seen women post-abortion recently or a long time ago have a spectrum of responses to that history. Many women felt great about it. They made a good decision. Their life moved the way they wanted it to. They don't feel great like, oh, that was the best. I mean, they feel like it was a good decision. I've had women who do feel regret. I've had women who felt regret about continuing pregnancies and having children. So I've seen regret. But there's also some women who are having some grief around it, which is different from regret. And our culture doesn't give women that opportunity to go, okay, I am letting go of this, what to me is a potential life. And that needs to be done with care, with respect, with love and support, and letting the sadness and the grief happen. So to me, all of those things would be wonderful if we had support for them, for women to grieve, for women to get the counseling and the support so they can make the best decision possible. Again, there are a number of studies that show that there aren't negative mental health ramifications. And of course, we live in a culture that is just rife with people with mental health issues. So it's often hard to tease out that it had to do with one thing or the other. Was it the abortion? Was it poverty? Was it the abuse history? And so on. So I think these are tricky things. But I will say, just experientially, just thinking about my patients over the years, I really haven't had a lot of patients who regretted it, even though they may have been sad or even grieving the choice. And I agree, though, that most women do not take this choice lightly. And again, we're desperately in need of wonderful support in our culture for making all of these choices. And mental health care should be a part of our healthcare system, and it is not.
That's a very interesting point, the idea that there's cultural acceptance of grief at the death of a child, of a baby, even if he's very young, but there isn't cultural support to the grief at an abortion or even at a miscarriage. There isn't as much understanding of the grief that women might go through. That's a very interesting point. I want to circle back a little bit more to the morality aspect of the debate. I want to touch upon, I'm going to read out a statistic. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment stated that unintended pregnancies are associated with birth defects, low birth weight, maternal depression, increased risk of child abuse, lower educational attainment, delayed entry into prenatal care, a high risk of physical violence during pregnancy, and reduced rates of breastfeeding. Life is enough of a challenge with all the support and all the love in the world. Is it right? Is it fair to let unwanted kids be born? Dr. Christina.
Well, well, one thing, I'm interested to hear where they get that statistic that an unwanted pregnancy causes birth defects, because I've not ever heard that, and I don't know that the fact that a pregnancy is unwanted is going to lead to a birth defect. But that being aside, I think this is where we have to circle back to that central question of what are the unborn? Because if the unborn are not human persons, then we shouldn't have to give any justification for ending their lives, right? But if they are human persons, then we seriously have to think about, okay, what justifies taking the life of another human being? And poverty certainly does not justify taking the life of another human being. If so, it would actually be much more expedient to round up all of the impoverished kids, or 50% of the impoverished kids that live in this country, and exterminate them, right? But no one is advocating for that, obviously, least of all me, certainly. So, but, when we talk about abortion being, first of all, it's not the solution that everyone thought it was going to be, I think, for poverty. I mean, if you look at poverty rates and things like that since Roe v. Wade went into place, we certainly have not made the huge strides that many people, I think, thought, many well-intentioned people probably thought that we would make. Poverty is worse. Preterm birth rates are worse. Lots of those things that you brought up. Domestic violence rates are worse. So abortion has not been the fix for that. And we had, right after Roe v. Wade went into place, we had a huge jump in the number of abortions that were done in this country. And so if it was going to be the fix for that, we would have seen it by now. We are 46 years out from Roe v. Wade. So, we would have seen at least some sort of change in that. But again, even if it did fix poverty, even if it did fix domestic violence, it still is the intentional ending of an innocent human life. And I would say that none of those things justify that, even though I don't believe that abortion fixes any of those things. Even if it did, to me, then it would be saying that it would be okay. It'd be the same as saying it would be okay to go out and kill born children, because the only difference they have from that unborn human being is size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. And none of those things are moral justifications for ending the life of an innocent human being. So, abortion is not the fix to our social ills. It is, I'm going to say, easy. It's not easy for the woman who's going through it. I realize that, but it's, a surgical abortion is a 10-minute procedure. So it's somewhat seen as an easy fix to someone who finds themselves in a difficult situation, because it's quick and it's over. And now we've just prevented that. The problem is, in doing the abortion, we haven't fixed any of the things that are causing her social problems. We haven't fixed her poverty. We haven't fixed the maybe abusive situation that she's in. And so we've just allowed that to continue.
Thank you, Christina.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's a human rights issue and a social justice issue. We have, in the whole planet, we've got almost 50,000 women a year who die from unsafe abortions. that's a social justice issue. We have over 400,000 women who have maternal death. Again, it's to me a social justice issue. And the human rights issue is that to me, the most profound right that I have is of my own body, and to make the choices for my own health, for my life, for my family, that are going to be significant for me. And while I don't see abortion as any kind of a cure-all, especially for something as complex as poverty, and there are so many factors in play around these issues, but I do think on a personal level, that choice, whether to continue a pregnancy, to bring a child into the world, whether I gave that child up for adoption or kept that child in my family, that has such profound effects. I don't see how anyone can make that choice for me because of that. I do think that we have to be very thoughtful about this issue. I want people to take it seriously. I want people to think carefully. I wish we had a much more just world and access to healthcare and all of the social goods that would really change the lives of many people. But I cannot escape the fact that I have had many women come to me where having a pregnancy, having a birth, whether they kept the child or not, would have been a personal disaster for them. And I'm really glad that they have the right to legal, safe abortion in this country. And they're not going to be one of those 50,000 women. And one of the things that we can say for sure changed significantly after Roe v. Wade is how many women in this country died or didn't die safe abortions.
Thank you, Sheri.
Can I just do a second round on that? Sorry.
I'm gonna give it a minute because I do want to go on to the other nuances about it. But again, the question is, life is enough of a challenge with all the support and love in the world. Is it right to let unwanted kids be born? Go ahead.
Okay. So again, I think asking that question, is it right to let unwanted children be born, would be the same as asking the question, is it right for a child who is already born, who is unwanted, to be allowed to live? And I would say yes, because whether or not we are wanted or not, we are human beings who have an inherent moral worth, and because of that, we have the rights that belong to all human beings, the right to life, the right to a chance at life being paramount amongst those. That's the very first right listed in our Declaration of Independence, and I think it would be, that's the right that sits at the base of all rights. And so I completely agree. This is a human rights issue. I would say this is the human rights issue of our time, because there's an entire subset of the population that are being targeted for extermination through this issue, through abortion.
Thank you, Doctor. Midwife Sheri.
Yeah, I don't feel like I have to add anything to that.
That's fine. No problem at all. Is abortion a good thing that it's available? Is it a necessary evil, or is it a bad thing? Should we strive to reduce the quantity of abortions even if we allow them through safe sex ed and other means? Dr. Christina.
Sure. Well, I am absolutely for reducing unintended pregnancies. I agree with you, Sheri. I think we need better education out there for young people, especially who are making choices and not necessarily thinking about the consequences of the choices that they're making. And, then they're facing, I'm sure you, as I have taken care of very young girls who found themselves pregnant because of choices that they made in their life that maybe weren't the wisest choices. And you just think, man, if they would have had a good support system around them, maybe they wouldn't have made the choices that they made, or they wouldn't find themselves in this situation. So absolutely, all of us are for reducing unintended pregnancies. We could certainly, I think it'd be a whole another roundtable conversation to talk about the different strategies that you can employ for reducing unintended pregnancies. But absolutely, I'm all for preventing unintended pregnancies. where the complicating factor comes in is once you have a pregnancy, you have a human life that you're dealing with. So we're not just talking about mom's body, we're talking about another human life now that we have to think about. And so, it's been very interesting. I think for a long time, Sheri, a lot of the people that I would talk to about this issue who I disagreed with were of the same mindset as you, that you would want women to make other choices, but wanting abortion to be available, in case they felt like they had to make that decision, kind of this reticence of, no, we don't just want abortion numbers to explode and, be having millions of abortions in this country. And so, and lately discussions that I've had with people haven't focused on, it's been, no, we want as many abortion numbers as possible. So it's so refreshing to me, Sheri, to have a conversation with you and hear a reasoned approach to this, coming even from someone who maybe we have some disagreement. But because of my perspective on this, that is a human life that has inherent moral worth, then I would say that abortion is always a bad thing. Again, when we're talking about, not when we're talking about the need to save a mother's life, but when we're talking about abortion as we would talk about in general, because again, in my perspective, that this is a human life, a distinct human life, then I can't say that I would ever condone ending that life because of
that. Thank you, Doctor.
I think access to choices is inherently a good thing, and for women to have to be empowered about the choices they make about their body, their health care, their family size. So to me, I think it is a good that we have safe legal abortion, that people have access to, and that people have access to all of the support that would be ideal, including things like all of the many, many things we could do to reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies. We're totally in agreement on that. And I think my experience in the world of people who are pro-choice is not that they want to just have tons of abortions. I really think everyone I've worked with or talked to would really love to not have those women sitting there crying in front of them when you give them the pregnancy test results. So I think in some ways we do all want there to be adequate support in place so women don't find themselves in that situation. And yet, as I said, in terms of the right to have autonomy and choice and be empowered, I think it is a very good thing that we have, and that we have access to it in a legal and safe way, and ideally in a way where women are supported doing whatever they need to do, whether it's having a pregnancy and continuing it, keeping a baby, giving a baby up, choosing an abortion. I would love to make that really good. What would make that a real good thing would be if people were supported all along the way in those choices. And also, frankly, that I think it would be an incredibly horrible, bad thing to lose that access. We're already seeing that. We're seeing states like Texas where there's very little access and incredibly restrictive laws, and we're already seeing significant ramifications in women's health and all of the other associated factors that go with unwanted pregnancies and unwanted children. So to me, that's the bad thing, those outcomes when we don't have the choice.
Thank you to the both of you. And it's really fantastic, I think, always to see how much common area usually there are in these polarizing topics themselves. Like, we get so caught up in this culture of divisiveness and argument, and you see all of it's like there's almost an attempt to polarize people as much as possible. And really, I feel like usually if you sit down around the table and try to find the commonalities and actually discern, there's usually very, very little space of disagreement. There's disagreement, there's different opinions, but usually both sides of the conversation are well-meaning. They just believe different things, and I think it's very important to this country and to the world in general that we practice this habit of talking about it. And I want to move on to our next question. Dr. Christina, you talked about it partially. I want to ask about, are there, in your opinion, any eccentric circumstances in which it is just to allow the mother to abort the fetus? So we already talked about the question of risk of life or health to the mother. So I want to touch also upon rape, incest, sexual slavery, underage pregnancy, some kind of disease or handicap for the fetus, shortening of the mother's life in cases of cancer, whatever, when she has to stop chemo and maybe she's going to die. There's different nuances about how this for reasons, extrinsic reasons for the abortion, and I'd like to hear both of you weigh in on do you think there is any condition other than risk of life for the mother where you think, yes, it is reasonable to allow abortion?
So I'll just start broadly and then kind of narrow in a little bit. So I would say outside of the risk of life of the mother, where you either have the option of losing 2 lives or losing 1 life, then I would choose to save the life of who I could save. And if I can only save the mom, then I'll save the mom. If she's past the point of viability, then an abortion would not be justified, because then you can just deliver her, you can end the risk of the pregnancy to her, and you can save the baby. So you can save them both. So that would be my general response, is that would be the only situation in which I would consider prematurely ending her pregnancy. Okay. Beyond that, I would say, again, we need to come back to that central question. Would we use these same reasons to justify ending the life of a born human being? If we can use that same reason to justify ending the life of a born human being, then perhaps that is a reasonable reason to allow abortion. It's interesting that you bring up the issue of cancer, because that aspect of pregnancy, one, it's becoming more common, actually, as we're seeing cancers in younger and younger women, to have women who find themselves in a dire situation with a bad cancer and pregnant. And even when I started my training in OBGYN 14 years ago, the situation was very different. Many times women were told, you can't do chemotherapy while you're pregnant. Now there's actually the vast majority of chemotherapy medications can actually be used safely in pregnancy. They may pose some risk to growth of the baby, things like that have to be monitored very closely. But you can actually administer chemotherapy. The vast majority of chemotherapy agents now can be administered during pregnancy. I just recently took care of a woman with a stage 4 cancer who was given chemotherapy throughout her pregnancy. So that is not a justification, just a broad justification for telling a woman that she needs to end her pregnancy. There are also many medical conditions that we used to once say those can't be managed safely in pregnancy, you're going to need to end your pregnancy, that now we can actually medically manage them and at least get that baby. We may not get her to full term, but at least get that baby to the point where he or she can survive outside of the mother. Rape is a very difficult situation, obviously. I would never minimize the trauma that is for a woman. And then, especially if she's facing now a pregnancy as a result of that rape. This is, something that is often talked about in this discussion. It accounts for a very minor percentage of abortions that are done in this country, but I'm not going to minimize either the choice that women are facing when they find themselves pregnant as a result of rape. Again, I would say this is a woman that needs a huge amount of support and love through whatever choice that she makes. However, what would we say to a woman who, can I just finish this one?
Yeah. Finish the sentence.
What would we say to a woman who, say, she was raped and she decided to continue the pregnancy and keep that baby at home, and then maybe when the baby was 6 months old decided, you know what, I'm seeing this baby every day. This is just really, really hard for me. I can't handle seeing this baby every day because it is a reminder to me of what happened to me. And so I'm just going to end this child's life because I can't handle this reminder. all of us, I think, would say, no, there are things that we can do to help you. If you can't continue to parent that child, that's totally fine. We can find a home where that child can be raised. And so, we do need to support women incredibly through afterwards as they process through their grief, instead of adding the double trauma to them, which again, the studies bear out that women actually have worse mental health outcomes if they were raped and then have an abortion versus if they were raped and carry the pregnancy to term. But aside from studies, we absolutely need to support women, but I can't use that as a justification for ending a human life.
Well, I'm already believe that the choice is up to women, and that certainly in conjunction with her healthcare providers if there are health issues. And so I have a broad list of reasons that I might personally make those choices, and I want all women to have those same choices. So it's really up to them if an incest or rape or some other trauma happened to them and they choose to have an abortion. If they just choose to have an abortion because it just isn't going to work for their life to have a baby. And I just will add to me again the issue of viability, because it's come up a number of times. I just want to say that having a fetus inside that is non-viable to me is very different than having a 6-month-old. So I think the issue of saying, well, it's inconvenient having a baby right now, I think I'll kill them. To me, that argument is a little specious, because the 6-month-old is viable, and there are a whole lot of different choices we have at that point. So I do just want to feel compelled to say that to me there is a huge distinction there. But basically, I really want to have women have the right to make whatever choice is right for them.
Thank you, Sheri. Is abortion in the case of fetuses with profound, again, these are a couple of questions that are more relevant to Dr. Christina, because you already made your position very clear. Although some of it also circles to you, because if you're going to talk about abortion in the case of fetuses with profound abnormalities, is it acceptable even when death is guaranteed shortly after birth, and anencephaly in which the brain is missing, or limb-body wall complex in which organs develop outside the body cavity? Basically, if prenatal testing shows that the embryo is likely to die shortly after birth, do you think it's acceptable to have an abortion, or do you think you would still be compelled to bring that that child to term again, because it is a person, even though it's going to die shortly after? And I also want to enrich the question a bit. I want to touch about the issue of prenatal genetic testing for abnormalities such as Down syndrome. It's been labeled eugenic termination as a way to save unnecessary human suffering, or is it simply a prejudiced extermination of viable human life? And I think the question is relevant to you, Sheri, because sometimes these tests are relevant after the point of viability. So if that is the case, do you think that it justifies an abortion after the point of viability, if we know that the child is going to have Down syndrome or something else that's going to definitely going to lead to a very challenging life, both to the child and his environment? So Dr. Christina.
Okay. Can I request 3 minutes? Because I feel like that was like a multi-part question.
Most definitely. You got it.
Okay. Well, so first of all, I think and I have taken care of many families who have been given the diagnosis of a life-limiting condition, which is the phrase that I prefer to use for really significant abnormalities, because incompatible with life, I think, is a bit disingenuous. One, you already have a human life there, but two, many of these can actually survive for some amount of time beyond birth. There's a documented case of a baby with anencephaly who's now almost 2 years old. So they're not incompatible with life. They may be a life-limiting condition that is expected to take the life of that child at some point in time. But that being said, again, it's still a human life. Because of that, it still has worth. However, I know for many women facing the challenge of carrying a baby, knowing that that baby is not going to survive very long is very difficult. I don't think the answer for that then is telling them, well, you just should end the life then of that baby and move on. I think helping them process through their grief, which oftentimes takes some time, maybe getting them into a perinatal hospice program, which is a wonderful thing for families that helps them walk through the grief process, just like you would if you had to put your mother on hospice and walk through the grief process of facing losing your mother, something like that. So perinatal hospice is a wonderful program that has really started gaining in popularity for families that are facing these life-limiting conditions. The other thing is that, and this kind of ties back into the viability issue, is that with advances in medical science, medical technology, viability and incompatible with life conditions don't look like what they did even 10 years ago when I started in practice. When I started in practice, 24 weeks was pretty much the hard line of viability. Now, in some centers, they have babies that survive even as young as 21 and a half weeks. Where I worked in Kenya, because we had very minimal support for our babies, their viability was more like 32 weeks. So viability looks very different depending on where you're at. And the same thing with these life-limiting conditions. Trisomy 18 used to be considered a death sentence. Now we have children that are 8, 10, 12 years old, if they have appropriate interventions, that are surviving, that their families are enjoying the blessing of having them in their lives. But again, this used to be considered an incompatible with life diagnosis. However, we now know that it's not. Many, many years ago, trisomy 21 or Down syndrome was considered incompatible with any sort of meaningful life expectancy or life experience. I think I have several friends that have children with Down syndrome who will tell you that that they are a meaningful part of their family. And you know, I think we've seen certainly plenty of examples of people who have Down syndrome who are making meaningful contributions, who are surviving. They're not incompatible with life. But yet you have countries like Iceland who are using genetic testing to exterminate the entire population of Down syndrome from their country. So I do think we have to be very careful about using these kinds of definitions when we're talking to patients, when we're talking to people in general, because this is not a hard and fast line of this is someone who's not going to survive or this is someone who is. And even if it is, again, what does that have to say about their worth as a human being? When we start making judgment calls on this human being has more worth than this one because this one is more able than this one is, we get into very dangerous territory there.
So Christina, I totally hear what you're saying about the dangerous territory. And I really agree. We need to be very carefully looking at these situations and what's possible and what we know and what we don't know. And at the same time, I still come back to that with to the same root, which is I think these are choices that a woman needs to make with her family, with her care providers, with as much information as possible, so that she has a choice if she has a child that has a life-limiting condition. Ideally, again, we're going to find that out as early as possible. Sometimes we don't find out until significantly further along in the pregnancy. And again, I would want the woman to be able to make this decision, to be the ultimate decider. And I'm not going to tell her what to do. I'm not going to say what she should or shouldn't do. I just want to offer her as much information as possible, what we know, what we don't know, and where we are right now in terms of science and even some ideas of who knows where we will be. At the same time, and this is significant to me, I make some distinctions here between things like Down syndrome and a baby that has something like something that at this point we know is likely to be life-limiting and terminal shortly after birth. So again, these are the kinds of things I think we need to be teasing out. And as a culture, I think we need to be looking at the genetic testing because we're going to be getting more and more and more ability to test for all sorts of things, including probably intelligence and looks, and that I don't want our choices to be based on those things. So I think we need to start looking at those carefully. And I don't have an answer for what we need to do about those things. I really don't. But I will come back to, at this moment in time, I think the choice needs to lie with the person whose body that fetus is gestating in.
But I have questions, and lots of them. Let's make this question, we touched upon this question before. I want to just make it a quick run through before we move on to the next topic. It's a question of adoption. There's around 2.6 million Americans that are seeking to adopt children. The number of U.S. infant adoptions dropped from about 90,000 in 1971 to 18,329 in 2014. Do you think that these stats have any bearing on the abortion question? I mean, I know you guys already agree that we should make adoption a more accessible, a more mainstream, a more commonplace option. But do you think that the mere fact that adoption rates have plummeted and that there is an overabundance of people that are looking to have a bigger family and can't give birth to children, do you think that it actually has a bearing on the question, or don't you?
Well, I mean, I would say that it absolutely does, in the sense of one of the reasons that often is given for why abortion should be available is because some of these women that find themselves in crisis pregnancy situations don't have the resources to raise these children, or don't desire to raise children. And so this absolutely provides an out for that, or a solution to that problem, that there are families that are willing, absolutely willing, again, especially newborns, but we need families that are willing to take children out of foster care as well, older children, things like that. And there are families out there that are willing to do that. So I do think it plays into the discussion from that standpoint, from if we're going to honestly talk about solutions to this problem of children being born and being unwanted, or being abused because they're unwanted, or being raised in poverty. There are solutions to that. One of the solutions, I don't believe it's the only solution, but one of the solutions certainly would be that mother can place her child for adoption. I think from my experience, just in talking to people about this, and just having patients come to me and kind of discussing through all of their options when they find themselves with this unintended pregnancy, many people, I think, have misconceptions just about adoption and what it involves and what it would be like. And so I think, again, we need more education for women so that they know. So at the very least, and I'm not saying women should be forced into that option, but again, if we're about empowering women, then we should be all about, and I think Sheri and I are in agreement with this, them getting all the information that we have so that they can make a good choice for them. I just have to wonder how many women might have chosen adoption instead of abortion if they had more information. I don't know the exact answer to that, but certainly I think the more information women have, the better.
Well, having counseled a good number of women who are in that situation where they had an unwanted pregnancy, I'm all about giving them all of the information about adoption as an option. It exists, it's there. And of course, like everything else in our culture, it'd be great if there was more support and resources for people. At the same time, if we make abortion illegal, when a woman has an unwanted pregnancy, even if adoption is an option, she still has to go through the pregnancy and birth. So she still would be forced to do that if abortion isn't an option and she doesn't want to raise a child. So again, for me, this is why we need all of these options available.
Thank you, Sheri.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm gonna move to a bit of a different aspect of the debate. more policy and public interest like aspect of this question. I want to touch about, do you think that will criminalizing abortion reduce it, or will it simply increase the incidence of illegal and supervised facilities and the elements involved in abortion, much like prohibition didn't actually stop people from drinking, it just pushed the whole drinking world underground?
I am so glad you asked that question because it was something that I wanted to try to get around to at some point. So I'm glad you asked the question. So we know when we look at numbers of abortions prior to Roe v. Wade versus after Roe v. Wade, the number of abortions jumped dramatically. So we do know, not only through looking at this topic, but through looking at any other kind of social issue that maybe has been made illegal, that certainly the fact that something is illegal is a deterrent to a lot of people to do that thing. Now, does it mean that abortion is going to end completely if we make it illegal? Absolutely not. I'm not naive enough to think that it's not going to. However, we do know, one, that it would dramatically reduce the number of abortions because of just the threat of something being illegal is a deterrent. If it wouldn't be a deterrent to the women, it certainly would be a deterrent to physicians, because I'm not a believer that women should be prosecuted or criminalized for abortion. I think that the abortion providers, if it were illegal, should be the ones that are responsible for that. The other thing is that oftentimes this talk is kind of thrown around of prior to Roe v. Wade, and we had back alley abortions and lots of women died. And actually, if you look at what was actually happening prior to Roe v. Wade, the vast majority of abortions were being provided by physicians, actually. And the back alley abortion refers to the back door of their office or their clinic that they would have the women come in because abortion was illegal. So they would have them come in through the back. These were many of the same physicians that then began performing legal abortions once abortion was legal. So they were being performed by, not all, but the vast majority were being performed by physicians even prior to Roe v. Wade. And then also the numbers of, are we going to see a huge increase in maternal mortality if we make abortion illegal? Actually, if you look at the numbers of women that were dying in the few years preceding Roe v. Wade, the number for each year was anywhere between 100 and 150, which is still too many. Even one is too many. However, it's not in the thousands. And even the architects of Roe v. Wade have now admitted that they falsely inflated those numbers. We saw a decrease in the number of deaths from abortions with the advent of antibiotics, actually, is what started to lead to a decrease in maternal deaths related to abortion. So if you look at, I only know about the 5 years preceding Roe v. Wade without pulling out my resources and looking at them, but certainly the 5 years preceding Roe v. Wade, the number of deaths from abortion was each year was less than 150. And so if we made Roe v. Wade, if we overturned Roe v. Wade, of course, then the decision would just return to the states. But even in states where abortion perhaps would be illegal, we would not expect, based on that, to see a significant jump in the number of maternal deaths. The other thing is that we can look at countries in which abortion has either been legalized or made illegal and actually see that you don't see a significant increase in maternal mortality when you go from legal abortion to illegal.
I think that there are thousands and thousands of women dying from unsafe abortions in the world right now. I think that to assume that that's not the case is I don't want to disagree with you. I really don't. And yet I feel very strongly that there are women dying because of the policies that are in place right now, that the states that have already passed significant restrictions, we're seeing more women dying from pregnancy complications. We're seeing more babies that have problems. And that I think we probably, if we had better statistics, would also see that women who are trying to abort themselves are having issues. At the same time, we have to remember that we now have medical abortion. So women have a whole different pathway to abortion than they did when Roe v. Wade was passed. So They don't have to have a surgical abortion now. They can take some pills. And women all over the world are using that as an access to abortion in places where they don't have it. So what would happen, or what is already happening as abortion becomes more and more restricted in more states, I think we're seeing a lot of negative consequences. And at the same time, I think we just don't have great statistics. So I think it's a little hard to parse out what's causing what, especially when we look back historically, because medicine is so different now. So I don't know. I really don't know what's going to happen. I do know, though, that more women are choosing to go on the internet, get the pills, and do it on their own in places where they don't have access. And I, as a healthcare provider, don't find that to be a great situation. If women are going to be doing medical abortions, I want me or someone like me to be taking care of them and supervising them and making sure that they're safe. And that's not happening for a lot of women right now. And again, I don't have the data right now to tell you what the consequence of that is, but I'm sure in some cases it's not good.
Sheri, sorry, can I just respond to her? It's a point of agreement. So yeah, I mean, Sheri, I completely agree with you about the women getting medication abortions over the internet or through the mail. That as healthcare providers, we absolutely should be opposed to that because it is not safe. It's medication abortions actually have a 4 times higher complication rate even than surgical abortions. And so if this becomes more of a thing that women are doing, where they're doing this without the supervision of any sort of healthcare provider, we are going to see more women dying from this. And these companies that are dispensing it absolutely should be prosecuted and stopped from doing this, because it's not, regardless of your feelings about whether abortion is a moral right or not, that's not good medicine. I think Sheri and I both agree on that for sure.
Well, and they're all over the world.
Right.
Companies that are supplying this, and women all over the world are utilizing that pathway because if they don't have a legal, accessible, low cost, local pathway. Sorry.
No need to apologize, ladies. There seems to be a correlation between legalizing abortion and a reduction in crime rates, which would indicate an increased risk of criminality amongst unwanted children. Is it just to impose that risk on society by criminalizing abortion, especially since it would seem reasonable to assume, I'm going out on a limb, that there is a cost to born life accrued by giving birth to babies who will grow up and murder other human beings. So in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade, people looked at the statistics in different states, how quickly they adopted, whatever the case may be, and there seems to be a correlation between reduction of crime rates and availability of legal abortion. So the question is, do you think that considering that is just to impose that risk of criminality on society by criminalizing abortion?
Well, certainly they have never tied directly a reduction in crime rates to abortion numbers. However, abortion numbers kind of hit their peak, I believe, in the late 80s, early 90s, and that's when actually crime was at its peak. So now we may have lower crime numbers, but we also have lower abortion numbers now as well than we did even 10 or 15 years ago. So, certainly you could look at that. But again, if we could go through and handpick at 2 years old, which 2-year-old child was going to become a serial killer, or which 2-year-old child was going to become a bank robber or whatever, is it okay to kill them because, they're only going to grow up to be a murderer, or they're only going to grow up to be a bank robber? So what good are they to society? Again, we have to be very careful about disposing of human life simply because they may be a detriment to society. And when you look at finances and things like that, I also think it's dangerous to play the game of not finances necessarily on like a family or a personal level, but looking at finances of a country and the management of human lives based on finances that can be extended to many different circumstances. End of life care, people with illnesses that require a lot of treatment, that sort of thing, so it becomes then a very slippery slope of okay, well, how much money is too much money to spend on somebody? And are we going to cut that off? And then where does that end? So that would be my response to that.
I think it's also really important to look at a distinction between causation and correlation.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're looking at studies, and you have something that says, abortion rates dropped at the same time crime dropped, that's just a correlation. That just happened to happen at the same time. There's nothing really that indicates one thing was the cause of the other. And so I'm sure we could find lots of correlations, but I don't think that's necessarily a useful metric to measure things by. I do think we can look at the economics of what's the impact of having a child that isn't even necessarily unwanted, but that a family might not have great resources to take care of. I mean, a lot of people don't have good parenting skills, for example. We don't teach them how to do it. We don't give licenses like if you needed to learn, drive a car. We do know that if we do lots of interventions where we support parenting education, for example, the family does better. And I don't just mean the kids, but the whole family does better. If we had better economic support for families with children, then perhaps people would not be pushed to criminality, by the way. I mean, we don't even know. Is it the kids growing up to be criminals is what they're saying? Or maybe it's the parents who are like, I can't feed my kid. I'll go steal something. Mm-hmm. Right? So we have no way of really knowing on a little picture. But when we look at the big picture, we can see that there are significant economic costs to people raising children when it's stretching their resources, when they're already mentally and emotionally stressed, when they are having a hard time putting food on the table, when they're working 2 or 3 jobs and they're exhausted. We know it's really hard to parent kids even when you're in a good mood. But you've just worked your second job and gotten home and your kids are screaming for attention, it's not going to be a good situation. And that's going to lead to all kinds of consequences, mental, emotional, economic, and so forth. So again, it becomes this bigger social justice issue. What can we do as a culture to help families so they're not in this situation? Having more abortions or less abortions? I'm not sure that that's the most significant factor here, but I do think having a multifactorial viewpoint where we look at all of the issues could eventually create some significant difference in these unfortunate dynamics of criminality, poverty, access to everything, healthcare, education, and so forth.
There is an opinion that abortion keeps population levels at a manageable level, keeping the results of overpopulation at bay, malnutrition, starvation, poverty, lack of medical and educational services, pollution, underdevelopment, and conflict over resources. With the advance of medicine and the reduction of conflict, it seems that there has to be a compensatory way of keeping population levels manageable other than mass disease or violent mass conflict. So I think this is more pertinent to third world countries and such than the USA really, but it is a question that people have raised about, well, the alternative is effectively like war or wholesale disease. So what do you have to, how do you want to address that?
Well, I think we certainly can't start exterminating human beings in order to control populations. And that really is the central question. Is, again, I mean, I hate to sound like a broken record, but that really is at the heart of this discussion is what do we believe those unborn are? And if they're human beings, then they have to have the same rights as other human beings. And so we can't start just exterminating at will human beings in order to achieve population control. One, I will preface by saying I certainly am not an expert on the topic of population control. I'm an OB/GYN, and that is my area of expertise. However, from things that I've read and from people that I've talked to, I think overpopulation is, perhaps there are pockets in the world who have too high of a population for the space that they're occupying. And these tend to be in urban centers. And if people would have better resources to be able to leave the urban centers and go out into the more rural areas, then there actually would be space and resources for them, as well as wise management of resources on the part of our government here in the US, on the part of governments across the world. I've spent a lot of time working in third world countries. And so I've seen the results of mismanagement of a country's resources. I think we see it here too, but certainly not to the level that you see in the developing world. And so, I think the answer is not, again, the answer is not exterminating human beings. The answer is better management of resources. A lot of families, if they have the appropriate resources at their fingertips, will choose to limit themselves, even without abortion, to the number of children that they feel like their family can sustain. Is that 100% across the board? No, but I think it's the vast majority of families, and even families that I worked with in the developing countries that I worked in. Oftentimes were able to make those choices for themselves, to know what resources they had, what children they could support, that sort of thing, prior to becoming pregnant, as opposed to needing abortion as a fix for that. So, again, I think we have to go back to the central question of, if the unborn are human beings, then is it right to exterminate them simply to reduce a population size? I would say no, it's not. The same as it's not okay to exterminate born human beings in order to control population size. But we also need better resource management and better access to many of the resources, like clean water and food and things like that. These are the issues that women and parents in general in developing countries are facing. They're facing the need for clean water. Just giving them accessible abortion is not going to fix their need for clean water. Regardless of how many children they have, they still need clean water. They still need access to medications. They still need access to healthcare in other areas of their lives other than their reproductive health. I think one of the dangers that we fall into in this discussion, and I fall into too, because I'm so passionate about this topic, just as I'm sure you are, Sheri, and this is our area of expertise, so we tend to kind of get pigeonholed into reproductive health. But these families have other issues outside of that as well, and those issues need to be addressed.
So I completely agree with the fact that there are these other issues that need to be addressed for people around the world, like access to clean water is a great example. I think, though, that a couple things. One is that we've got too many people on the planet right this moment, and we are in line to have way too many people. We're already in climate crisis, and we are pushing ourselves to the edge of the envelope, and this planet can only sustain so many people, and I think we're already over the limit. So what are we going to do about that? Well, I think the number one answer is contraception. We have absolutely awesome ways to help women not get pregnant. And if every woman on this earth had access to that, we would have dramatic reductions in unwanted pregnancies. People would plan their family size. People would choose how many children they're having or how much child spacing they're having. Women would have, because they're not burdened by relentless pregnancies, have access to education, and that lifts up economies and countries when women have access to education. I think there were some social experiments, like in China, with the one-child policy, where they were, as a government, instituting a strict limit on population growth and pretty much enforced abortion. Particularly if women knew they were having a girl and they were only going to have one child, they wanted boys. So there was a lot of awful, terrible things that happened when a government is trying to control population that way, that I think is absolutely wrong. However, I don't think anyone's individual choice, whether to have a baby or not, I don't think anybody is saying, well, should I have this baby or not? Well, the world is so overpopulated, I shouldn't have this baby. I don't think those are the kinds of criteria that we're thinking about when we're making those decisions. So I will say, though, that education, especially about reproduction, contraception, that's where all the energy needs to go if we want to keep our planet in check. And I just have to add that the people who are having the most impact on the environment right now are us living in the first world, right? I use 20, 50 times more resources than a rural person living in the third world. And that's a whole other roundtable.
And we have a much lower population than many third world countries. So yeah, so reducing population is not gonna fix climate change.
So there's still a bunch of questions, but I think we've reached a good place, and I think we're at the 90-minute mark. It might be a good place to cut off. I think we've touched the main issues. I would like to summarize and say I've already touched about it during the roundtable, but I think it is splendid to discuss this topic. I think you guys give an excellent example of how people, even though they're not at the same place, they can discuss it with respect. They can put their cards on the table. This is what I believe in. This is what I'm concerned about. Dr. Christina, I found it very compelling the way you were very consistent in your logic, and it's definitely very, very sensible. Sheri, definitely, we could tell the depth of your knowledge and experience and compassion. And I think it's awesome. I think it's super, super important that we're able to have these conversations, because as important as this topic is, and I'm not in no way want to take away from its importance, I think it is even more important how we discuss these topics, whether it's gun control, whether it's women's rights, or whether it's abortion, or whether it's climate change. Whatever this question is, I think it's super, super important that we remember each other's humanity, and that in the US especially, that we are all part of one country. And if we don't subscribe to this idea of democracy, of a free marketplace of ideas, and we don't look forward to engaging with people of other opinions and hearing them out, and maybe enriching my own point of view, or maybe challenging my own point of view so it evolves a little bit, then I really am concerned about the future of our life here together. And I think that will lead to a lot of suffering either way. And I do think that there is a lot of consensus already. Everybody agrees that newborns should not be exterminated. Everybody agrees that they've achieved personhood, or even have agreement about the last trimester. So there's really only about 6 months of disagreement, which isn't that much when it's all said and done. With the human condition, we're capable of arguing about a much more wide span of things. Does one of you want to add, first of all, if you have any content or material of your own or somebody else that you want people to look into, or if you are open to people being in touch with you, or if you have any parting words? I'm going to do around 2 minutes for you, Dr. Christina, and 2 minutes for you, Midwife Sheri, and I think we'll wrap it up with that.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank you for hosting this, and I'm in complete agreement that it's so disheartening to me that in our society today, oftentimes people can't sit down and have these kind of conversations, because it just turns into kind of a screaming match and nobody's listening to each other. And you know, one of the great things I think about this country is that we were founded on the ability to have open, free discussions and disagree with one another, but still respect one another as human beings. And so, Sheri, thank you for a wonderful conversation. Thank you for, for being willing to share your perspective. And I appreciated hearing your perspective, and certainly gives me more things to think about. And thank you for being willing to just have a nice discussion and not be yelling at one another. So I certainly appreciate that. And if anybody who's watching this has more questions, or wants to find out more information, you can either go to the website for the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs. It's www.aaplog.org. Or you can contact me through my website, which is drfrancisforlife.com. So I'd welcome any questions. And again, thank you to both of you. It was great being here today.
Thank you, Christina. Sheri.
Well, it really was a pleasure. I am always looking to be able to have intelligent, nuanced conversations that involve listening and are respectful. And that is really hard to find in this day and age. So I really appreciate the opportunity to do the roundtable. Christina, it was a pleasure having this conversation with you, and that's not usually something I might say about somebody who's coming from a different perspective. And I think it's a wonderful example for people of what we can do, how we can have a conversation, how we can have disagreement in a way that is civil and respectful. And it felt very empathetic and compassionate all the way around. And I just really appreciate that opportunity. So yay for that. Thank you. I'm really just so thrilled that you're doing this. And in fact, I've mentioned it to a few people and they all are like, oh, give me the URL. I want to, there's some place to go to get that kind of conversation about things that people have discord about. So I can see how exciting it is to people. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, you can go to my website. It's intimateartscenter.com. Intimate, INTIMATE, arts, ARTS, center, spelled the American way, CENTER.com. And I, as I mentioned before, I'm much more now a teacher around sexuality as well as health, women's health, sexual health, that sort of thing. But you can find my books, my blogs, videos, all kinds of resources there. And you can contact me through the website. So come visit, come see all the fun stuff I have to offer.
Definitely sounds like it. Ladies, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I will post all the links below. If anybody has any questions, additions, suggestions, whatever, just post them below in the comments. Thank you so much. You guys were splendid. I hope you helped spread the art of listening just a bit farther. I will send you the links as soon as the video is ready. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.